The alien patrol didn't see the small human child until it was too late. 7-year-old Katie Miller stood in the middle of the ruined street, her blonde hair matted with dust from the collapsed buildings around her. The Crethean soldiers, their segmented armor gleaming under the dying sun, raised their plasma rifles as they approached. They had been hunting survivors for 3 days since the invasion of New Portland began. Katie's blue eyes were red from crying, but she wasn't crying now. She looked past the advancing aliens to the horizon where smoke rose in thick columns. Her lips moved, forming a single word that the Cretheans couldn't understand through their translators. The word was a name. 6 blocks away, Lieutenant Commander Alex Bryant heard it through his Neuralink. The former Navy SEAL had been tracking the patrol for an hour, watching them execute civilians without mercy. But when that one word came through his connection to the civilian emergency network, everything changed. His jaw tightened, his hands stopped shaking. The fear that had gripped him since watching his unit get vaporized 3 days ago simply vanished. The Cretheans had made a mistake. They had touched a child under Honey Badger's protection. Bryant moved like a ghost through the rubble. His combat suit was damaged, running on backup power, but his weapons were clean and loaded. The aliens had superior technology, faster ships, and deadlier weapons. They had conquered 47 worlds before Earth. They had never lost a ground engagement, but they had never met someone who earned the call sign Honey Badger by walking into a terrorist compound in Yemen and walking out alone with 12 hostages. The first Crethean died without knowing what hit it. Bryant's knife entered the gap between its helmet and chest plate, the blade finding the main nerve cluster that intelligence had identified. The alien dropped silently. Bryant caught its rifle before it clattered on the concrete. The second Crethean turned at the soft thud of its companion hitting the ground. It managed to raise its weapon halfway before Bryant's stolen plasma rifle punched a hole through its faceplate. The superheated bolt turned its head into vapor. The remaining 5 opened fire. Bryant was already moving, diving behind an overturned vehicle as plasma bolts turned metal into molten slag. He counted their shots, memorizing their firing pattern. Cretheans were methodical, trained to overwhelming precision. But precision made you predictable. He popped up, fired 3 times, and dropped back down. 2 hits, 2 kills. The aliens adjusted their formation, trying to flank his position. Bryant smiled coldly. They were doing exactly what he wanted. He triggered the explosive he had planted in the building to their right. The structure came down in a cascade of concrete and steel, crushing 2 aliens instantly. The last Crethean stumbled backward, its rifle swinging wildly as dust filled the air. Bryant walked out of the smoke like death itself. The alien fired twice, both shots going wide in its panic. Bryant didn't run. He didn't dodge. He simply walked forward, his rifle steady, and put 3 bolts center mass. The Crethean's armor held for the first 2 hits. The third one punched through. Katie still stood in the street, watching. Bryant knelt beside her, his scarred face softening for just a moment. "You okay, kid?" She nodded, then pointed to the sky where more Crethean dropships descended. Bryant checked his ammunition and smiled that cold smile again. The Cretheans were about to learn why humans called themselves the most dangerous species in the galaxy, not because they were the strongest or the fastest, but because when you threatened their children, they became something worse than any nightmare the universe had ever known. The Honey Badger had work to do. The Crethean Command Center was located in what used to be City Hall, a building that had stood for 200 years before the invasion. Now it bristled with alien technology, energy shields, and automated defenses. 300 soldiers guarded the perimeter. Inside, Commander Zethrak reviewed casualty reports with growing confusion. Humans were supposed to be easy prey. Soft, emotional creatures who panicked under pressure. Yet in the past hour, 17 patrols had gone silent. No distress calls. No warning. They simply stopped responding. Zithrak's mandibles clicked in annoyance as he ordered reconnaissance drones to investigate. The drones found nothing but bodies. Creathian bodies, arranged in patterns that the commander's tactical computer couldn't explain. Some were positioned as warnings. Others formed arrows pointing toward the command center. One patrol had been arranged to spell out a message in crude human letters, "Coming." Zethrak ordered all patrols to return to base. He activated the building's full defensive grid and called for reinforcements from orbit. The Creathian fleet had a battle cruiser in high orbit with enough firepower to turn the entire city into glass. If one human was causing this much trouble, Zethrak would simply eliminate the problem from space. The communication to the battle cruiser never went through. The command center's antenna array exploded in a ball of fire, severed by a precisely placed explosive charge. Backup systems activated, but they too went dead as power cords were cut by someone who knew exactly where to find them. Bryant watched from a building across the street using a scavenged Creathian scope to observe the chaos. The aliens were good soldiers, but they relied too heavily on their technology, cut their communications, blind their sensors, and they became confused. Confused enemies made mistakes. He had spent the last 2 hours turning New Portland into a maze of death. Every intersection was trapped. Every alley was a potential kill zone. The Creathians had superior firepower, but Bryant had the home advantage and 30 years of combat experience. More importantly, he had nothing left to lose. His family had died in the first bombardment. His unit was gone. The only thing keeping him alive was the promise he made to Katie Miller and the dozen other children he had found hiding in a basement shelter. He promised them safety, and Alex Bryant never broke his promises. The Creathians began their sweep at dusk, moving in tight formations with overlapping fields of fire. They were cautious now, aware that something was hunting them. Their thermal sensors should have picked up Bryant's heat signature, but he had solved that problem by stealing a Creathian thermal cloak from one of his earlier kills. He waited on the 3rd floor of an office building, perfectly still, as a squad of 10 aliens passed beneath him. He could have killed them easily, but killing them wasn't the goal. Not yet. First, he needed them terrified. Bryant triggered a recording he had made using a Creathian vocoder. The sound of their distress call echoed through the empty streets, coming from everywhere and nowhere. The squad froze, trying to locate the source. Their commander barked orders, but the confusion was spreading. Then Bryant opened fire. Not at the squad below, but at a fuel depot 3 blocks away. The explosion lit up the night sky, a fireball that rose hundreds of feet into the air. The Creathians turned toward the blast, weapons raised, and Bryant disappeared into the building's interior. He moved through the structure like water, using maintenance tunnels and elevator shafts that the aliens hadn't bothered to map. By the time they breached the building, he was already 2 blocks away, setting up his next ambush. The night became a symphony of chaos. Explosions echoed across the city at irregular intervals. Creathian patrols fired at shadows, wasting ammunition on empty buildings. Their communication network was fragmented, filled with panicked reports and contradictory orders. Zethrak watched his tactical display dissolve into chaos, dozens of red markers indicating contact with an enemy that seemed to be everywhere at once. In reality, Bryant was just one man, but he fought like he was Legion, using the Creathians' own fear against them. Every ambush was different. Every trap was unique. He never attacked the same way twice, never stayed in one place long enough to be tracked. By midnight, the Creathians had lost over 100 soldiers. Zethrak made the decision to pull all forces back to the command center and wait for dawn. Whatever was hunting them would be easier to kill in daylight, or so he reasoned. Bryant watched the aliens retreat, his face grim in the darkness. The Creathians thought they could outlast him by going defensive. They were wrong. He had already mapped every entrance to that building, every weakness in their shield grid, every blind spot in their sensor coverage. He checked his weapons one last time, then started moving toward the command center. Katie and the other children were hidden in a bunker 2 miles away with enough supplies for a week. They would be safe. But the Krethians wouldn't be. The honey badger was done playing. Now it was time to bring hell itself. The command center's shields flickered in the pre-dawn darkness, powered by generators that hummed beneath the building. Zethrak had positioned his remaining 200 soldiers in defensive layers, creating a fortress that should have been impregnable. Heavy weapons covered every approach. Snipers watched from elevated positions. Automated turrets tracked movement within a 3-block radius. Bryant studied the defenses from a rooftop 800 meters away, using a Krethian tactical scope to mark targets. A frontal assault would be suicide, which was exactly what the aliens expected. But Bryant hadn't survived 3 decades of warfare by being predictable. He had spent the last 4 hours in the city's underground infrastructure, planting explosives in the old service tunnels that ran beneath every major building. The tunnels were ancient, built long before the modern city, and the Krethians had no idea they existed. Their sensors were designed to detect threats from above and ground level, not from below. At exactly 0500 hours, Bryant triggered the first charge. The explosion erupted from beneath the street 50 meters from the command center's western wall, creating a crater that swallowed an entire squad of Krethian soldiers. Before the aliens could react, 3 more charges detonated in sequence, collapsing the underground parking structure that supported their heavy artillery positions. Zethrak's tactical display lit up with damage reports as the building shook. He barked orders for damage control teams, trying to restore order, but Bryant had anticipated that too. The communication jamming devices he had stolen and repurposed were now broadcasting on every Krethian frequency, filling their channels with white noise and corrupted data packets. The western shield generator overloaded from the underground explosions, creating a gap in the defensive grid. Bryant didn't hesitate. He emerged from a drainage tunnel 2 blocks away, carrying a Krethian rocket launcher he had salvaged from a destroyed patrol vehicle. The weapon was heavy, designed for their larger physiology, but Bryant had always been strong. He fired 3 rockets in rapid succession, each one targeting a specific weak point in the building's structure that he had identified during his reconnaissance. The first rocket took out the backup power relay. The second destroyed the main sensor array. The third punched through an exterior wall and detonated inside the building's armory. The secondary explosions were catastrophic. Plasma cells and conventional ammunition cooked off in a chain reaction that turned the entire second floor into an inferno. Krethian soldiers poured out of the building, their formations broken, their command structure in chaos. Bryant was already moving, racing through the streets with a precision that came from years of combat. He had memorized every corner, every piece of cover, every firing angle. The Krethians were better armed and better armored, but they were fighting on his territory now. He hit them from 3 different positions in under 2 minutes, firing from windows and alleyways, then disappearing before they could return fire. Every shot was aimed at weak points in their armor, joints and seals that intelligence had identified. He didn't waste ammunition on center-mass shots that their armor could absorb. A Krethian heavy weapons team set up a plasma cannon, trying to pin him down, but Bryant had planted a claymore mine in that exact position 3 hours earlier. The explosion shredded the team and their weapons, sending shrapnel tearing through nearby soldiers. Zethrak watched the battle unfold from inside the command center, his tactical mind struggling to understand how one human was destroying his force. The human wasn't using superior technology or overwhelming numbers. He was using knowledge, preparation, and a level of controlled aggression that the commander had never encountered. The Krethians had conquered worlds with billions of inhabitants. They had fought against species with natural armor, species with telepathic abilities, species that could survive in vacuum, but they had never fought a species that turned warfare into an art form, that studied violence the way others studied philosophy. Bryant reloaded behind a demolished vehicle, his breathing steady despite the exertion. He was 53 years old, well past his prime by military standards, but age had given him something more valuable than youth: patience. He knew when to attack and when to wait. He knew how to read a battlefield, how to find the invisible patterns in chaos. The Krethians were breaking. He could see it in their movements, the way they hesitated before advancing, the way they bunched together for psychological safety rather than tactical advantage. Fear was spreading through their ranks like a virus, and fear made soldiers sloppy. He triggered another series of explosives, this time collapsing the eastern approach to the command center. The aliens were being funneled now, forced into kill zones whether they realized it or not. Bryant had turned the entire district into a trap, and the Krethians were caught in the center. A dropship descended from orbit trying to evacuate the command staff, but Bryant had saved his last rocket for exactly this moment. The projectile caught the dropship's engine as it hovered, and the vehicle spiraled into the ground in a ball of flame. Zethrak made a decision. He activated the command center's self-destruct protocol and ordered his remaining forces to fall back to secondary positions across the city. Losing this battle was unacceptable, but losing his entire force was worse. The Krethians began their retreat, moving in tight formations under covering fire from their heavy weapons. Bryant let them go. He had achieved his objective. The command center was destroyed, their communication network was shattered, and their confidence was broken. The Krethians would be cautious now, defensive, which would give the remaining human resistance forces time to organize. He made his way back to the bunker where Katie and the other children waited. The sun was rising over New Portland, painting the smoke-filled sky in shades of orange and red. The city was in ruins, but it was still standing, and as long as it was standing, there was hope. Katie ran to him when he entered the bunker, her small arms wrapping around his waist. The other children gathered around, their faces showing relief and something else. Trust. They trusted him to keep them safe, and that trust was worth more than any medal or commendation. Bryant knelt down to their level, his scarred face softening again. He was tired, every muscle in his body screaming for rest, but there was still work to do. "We're not safe yet," he said quietly. "But we're going to be. I promise." The children nodded, believing him absolutely. And Alex Bryant, call sign Honey Badger, would make sure that promise came true. The Krethians had brought war to Earth, but they had awakened something far more dangerous. A human with nothing to lose and everything to fight for. The war was just beginning, and hell was coming with it. The Krethian fleet received Zethrak's distress signal at dawn. High Admiral Kreshtar reviewed the battle reports with disbelief that quickly turned to rage. One human. A single warrior had decimated a fortified position and destroyed the occupation force's command structure. It was impossible, yet the evidence was undeniable. Kreshtar ordered a full orbital bombardment of the sector. He would turn the entire district into molten glass and end this human's resistance permanently. But when the battlecruiser's targeting systems locked onto New Portland, something unexpected happened. The ship's weapons went offline, every system simultaneously failing. Deep in the battlecruiser's data core, a virus was spreading. It had been uploaded 3 weeks earlier by a teenage hacker named Marcus Webb, working from his basement in Atlanta before the invasion began. The virus was designed to activate only when the Krethians attempted an orbital strike on a populated area. It didn't destroy the ship's systems, it just prevented them from firing on civilian targets. Marcus was dead now, killed in the first wave of attacks, but his final gift to humanity was buying them time. Kreshtar screamed orders at his technical staff, demanding they purge the virus, but the code was replicating faster than they could delete it. The battlecruiser's weapons would be offline for at least 6 hours. Bryant didn't know about the virus or Marcus Webb. He only knew that the sky hadn't turned to fire, which meant he had more time to work. He spent the morning teaching the children basic survival skills, showing them how to find clean water, how to signal for help, how to stay hidden. They were too young for this knowledge, but the world had become a place where children needed to know how to survive. By afternoon, other survivors began arriving at the bunker. They came in small groups drawn by rumors of a resistance fighter who had destroyed an entire Crethean garrison. Bryant found himself leading a group of 40 civilians, most of them injured or traumatized. They looked at him with hope, expecting him to save them all. He wanted to tell them he was just one man, that he couldn't fight an entire alien invasion alone. But when he looked at their faces, at the children clutching makeshift toys, at the elderly helping the wounded, he knew he didn't have a choice. These people needed someone to believe in, and sometimes believing in something was enough to keep you alive. A woman named Lisa Carson, a former Army medic, took charge of the wounded. A man named Frank Rodriguez, who had been a construction foreman, began reinforcing the bunker's defenses. Others contributed what skills they had, turning the shelter into a small community. Bryant coordinated their efforts, drawing on his leadership training to organize them efficiently. That evening, a Crethean patrol discovered the bunker's location. 50 soldiers surrounded the entrance, demanding surrender. Bryant could have fought them, probably killed half before they overwhelmed his position, but that would have left the civilians defenseless. He needed a different strategy. He walked out alone, his hands empty, his weapons left inside the bunker. The Cretheans trained their rifles on him, their mandibles clicking in anticipation of an easy kill. But Bryant wasn't there to fight. He was there to talk. "You want me," he said simply. "Let the civilians go, and I'll surrender." The Crethean commander, a soldier named Vexnal, studied the human with interest. This was the warrior who had destroyed Zethrak's garrison. Capturing him would be a significant victory. Vexnal agreed to the terms, ordering his soldiers to allow the civilians safe passage. Bryant watched as Lisa led the group out of the bunker, Katie holding her hand. The little girl looked back at him, her eyes filled with betrayal and fear. Bryant smiled at her, trying to convey reassurance, but he knew what was coming. The Cretheans weren't going to honor their agreement. As soon as the civilians were clear, they would kill everyone. He had counted on that. The moment the last civilian cleared the bunker entrance, Bryant activated the dead man's switch in his pocket. The bunker, which he had spent the morning rigging with every explosive he could find, detonated in a massive fireball. The explosion consumed the entrance and most of the Crethean patrol, turning the underground shelter into a tomb. Bryant had already moved, diving behind cover as the blast wave rolled over the street. The surviving Cretheans opened fire, but he was already returning shots, using a rifle he had hidden near the exit point. The battle lasted 3 minutes, a furious exchange of plasma bolts and conventional bullets. When the smoke cleared, Bryant stood among the bodies of the Crethean patrol, blood running from a dozen wounds. His armor was shredded, his left arm hanging useless, but he was alive. The civilians stared at him from their hiding positions. Realizing what he had done, he had turned himself into bait, using the Cretheans' own aggression against them. Lisa ran to him with her medical kit, but Bryant waved her off. There would be time for treatment later. Right now, they needed to move. More Cretheans would be coming, drawn by the explosion. He led the group through the city's ruins, using routes he had scouted earlier, always staying ahead of the alien patrols. They moved for 3 hours, finally reaching an old subway station that had been abandoned for decades. The tunnels would provide shelter and multiple escape routes. Bryant collapsed against a wall as Lisa began treating his wounds, her hands steady despite the chaos of the day. Katie sat beside him, her small hand finding his good one. She didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. The connection between them had been forged in fire, a bond stronger than words. Bryant squeezed her hand gently, promising without speaking that he would keep fighting, keep protecting, keep surviving. Outside, the Crethean fleet finally purged Marcus Webb's virus from their systems. Admiral Kreshtar prepared to unleash orbital fire on the city, determined to crush this resistance once and for all. But something made him hesitate. The human warrior had survived impossible odds multiple times. Perhaps direct assault wasn't the answer. Perhaps it was time to be smarter. Kreshtar ordered his ground forces to begin a systematic sweep of the city, block by block, building by building. They would use overwhelming numbers and careful tactics to corner the human and his followers. No more single patrols. No more isolated encounters. They would hunt as a pack, the way apex predators were meant to hunt. In the subway tunnel, Bryant checked his remaining ammunition and smiled grimly. The Krathians were learning, adapting their tactics. Good. That would make the fight more interesting. He had been fighting losing battles his entire career, and he had learned one important truth. You didn't have to win every fight. You just had to survive long enough to find the winning move. And somewhere in this burning city, in the chaos and destruction, that winning move was waiting. He just had to stay alive long enough to find it. The next morning brought a sound that Bryant hadn't heard in days. Human aircraft. 3 F-35 fighters screamed over New Portland at low altitude, their missiles turning a Krathian supply depot into a crater. The jets were gone before the aliens could react, disappearing into the clouds like ghosts. But their message was clear. Earth's military hadn't been completely destroyed. The fight was spreading. Bryant gathered the survivors in the subway station, their faces showing the first hints of hope since the invasion began. He knew that hope was dangerous, that it could make people careless, but it was also necessary. Without hope, they would give up, and giving up meant death. He organized them into teams based on their skills. Lisa would handle medical care. Frank would manage defenses and construction. A former cop named Danny Martinez would handle security and reconnaissance. A school teacher named Helen Foster would care for the children and maintain morale. Bryant himself would handle combat operations and strategic planning. They were a small group, barely 40 people, but they were organized and motivated. More importantly, they were learning. Bryant spent hours teaching them basic tactics, showing them how to move quietly, how to set up ambushes, how to scavenge supplies. The adults picked up the lessons quickly, many of them having military or law enforcement backgrounds. The children learned, too, though Bryant tried to shelter them from the worst of it. Katie proved to have a natural talent for observation, noticing details that adults missed. An 8-year-old boy named Chris became their best scavenger, able to find supplies in places others overlooked. They were growing up too fast, forced into roles no child should have to fill, but they adapted because adaptation was survival. Over the next week, Bryant's group became a thorn in the Krathian occupation. They hit supply convoys, sabotaged equipment, and freed prisoners from alien detention centers. Each operation was carefully planned and executed with precision. They never stayed in one place long, always moving through the city's underground network. The Krathians began calling him Vrekish, which translated roughly to the unkillable one. Soldiers whispered stories about the human warrior who appeared from nowhere, struck without warning, and vanished like smoke. Some claimed he wasn't human at all, but some kind of demon that fed on fear. Admiral Kreshtar knew better. The human was mortal, which meant he could be killed. The admiral began studying human warfare, reading translated military texts, watching historical battle footage. He needed to understand how humans thought, how they fought, what made them dangerous. What he discovered disturbed him. Humans didn't fight like other species. They didn't retreat when logically defeated. They didn't surrender when outnumbered. They fought with a stubbornness that bordered on insanity, and they had turned warfare into a science more advanced than any other species the Krathians had encountered. Kreshtar realized that his forces had made a critical error. They had treated Earth like any other conquest, assuming technological superiority would guarantee victory. But humans had been fighting each other for thousands of years, refining tactics and strategies through countless conflicts. They understood violence in a way that the Krathians, with their relatively peaceful expansion, did not. He called a meeting with his senior commanders, showing them footage of Bryant's operations. The human used terrain, timing, and psychology as weapons. He turned the Krathian strengths into weaknesses, their technology into liabilities. He was teaching other humans to do the same, spreading his knowledge like a virus. This one human has done more damage than entire planetary defense forces, Kreshtar said. He must be eliminated, but more importantly, we must learn from him. If one human can fight like this, imagine what an organized resistance could accomplish. The Admiral was right to be concerned. Across the planet, similar stories were emerging. In Tokyo, a former Yakuza enforcer was leading guerrilla operations. In London, an SAS veteran had turned the underground tube system into a fortress. In Moscow, a Spetsnaz operator was teaching civilians advanced combat techniques. Humanity was learning to fight back, and they were learning fast. Bryant heard these stories through salvaged communication equipment, and they gave him hope. Earth wasn't conquered yet. The Creathians had won the initial battles, destroyed most of the military infrastructure, but they hadn't broken the human spirit. That was their fatal mistake. He was planning his next operation when Danny Martinez returned from a reconnaissance mission with urgent news. The Creathians were building something in the center of the city, a massive structure that was heavily guarded. Intelligence suggested it was some kind of communication relay, designed to coordinate the entire planetary invasion. Bryant studied the crude maps Danny had drawn, his tactical mind already working through possibilities. The relay would be nearly impossible to destroy. The Creathians would have learned from his previous attacks, fortified the position against underground assault, covered every approach. A direct attack would be suicide. But Bryant had spent his entire career attempting the impossible. He gathered his core team, Lisa, Frank, Danny, and Helen, and began planning. They would need explosives. More than they currently had. They would need a distraction, something big enough to draw Creathian forces away from the relay. And they would need perfect timing. Most importantly, they would need to be willing to sacrifice everything. Because this wasn't just another raid. This was a chance to strike a blow that would echo across the entire planet. If they could destroy that relay, they could disrupt the Creathian command structure, give other resistance groups the opening they needed. It was the winning move Bryant had been waiting for. And like every winning move in warfare, it required courage, skill, and a willingness to stare death in the face without blinking. The honey badger had one more battle to fight, and this time he was bringing everyone to hell with him. The communication relay rose from the ruins of what used to be Central Park, a towering structure of alien metal and glowing energy conduits. It pulsed with power, transmitting orders to Creathian forces across the continent. Admiral Kreshtar had positioned 500 soldiers around the structure, supported by heavy weapons, automated defenses, and aerial surveillance. It was the most fortified position on Earth. Bryant watched it from 3 miles away through a salvaged telescope, mapping defenses he couldn't possibly defeat. Frank stood beside him, shaking his head at the impossibility of the task. Lisa checked her medical supplies, knowing she would need every bandage and stimulant they had. Danny cleaned his weapons with the calm of a man who knew he might not survive the day. The plan was insane, which meant it was exactly the kind of plan that might work. Bryant had spent 2 weeks preparing, not just his team, but every resistance cell within 50 miles of New York. He had used captured Creathian communication equipment to coordinate a simultaneous uprising, dozens of attacks happening at once across the city. The aliens would be forced to divide their forces, responding to threats everywhere. But the relay would still be heavily defended, and that's where Bryant's true strategy came into play. He wasn't going to attack the relay directly. He was going to make the Creathians destroy it themselves. On the morning of the operation, Bryant's team moved into position. They had spent days infiltrating the area, using the subway tunnels and sewer systems to get close without being detected. 40 people, armed with whatever weapons they could scavenge, facing an enemy that had conquered worlds. The odds were impossible, which was exactly how Bryant liked them. At exactly 0900 hours, the uprising began. Explosions rocked the city as resistance fighters hit Creathian positions across Manhattan. Power stations, supply depots, patrol stations, all attacked simultaneously. The alien communication networks lit up with distress calls as commanders struggled to coordinate responses. Admiral Kreshtar watched his tactical display dissolve into chaos for the second time in 3 weeks. The human resistance was more organized than intelligence had suggested, more coordinated. He ordered reinforcements to critical positions, pulling soldiers from secondary locations. But he kept the relay's garrison at full strength. Whatever else happened, that structure could not fall. Bryant and his team emerged from the tunnels 2 blocks from the relay, moving through the ruins with practiced silence. They weren't trying to reach the structure. Instead, they positioned themselves in buildings that surrounded it, setting up firing positions with clear lines of sight to the relay itself. Katie and the other children were safe in a bunker 10 miles away, far from the fighting. Bryant had made sure of that. Whatever happened today, they would survive. That was the only thing that mattered. The Krathian perimeter guards detected movement in the surrounding buildings and opened fire, plasma bolts turning concrete into molten slag. Bryant's team returned fire, not aiming at the aliens but at the relay itself. Their conventional weapons did no damage to the structure's shields, but that wasn't the point. The point was to make the Krathians think they were under attack from those positions. The alien commander at the relay made the predictable decision. He ordered his heavy weapons to target the buildings where the fire was coming from. Plasma cannons and missile batteries swiveled toward the surrounding structures, and then they opened fire with devastating force. The buildings collapsed under the onslaught, tons of concrete and steel crashing down. But Bryant's team had already moved, using underground passages to escape before the bombardment began. The falling buildings created a massive dust cloud that obscured the entire area, and in that dust cloud, Bryant made his move. He and 5 others, including Danny and Frank, sprinted through the chaos toward the relay's eastern perimeter. The Krathians were focused on the collapsing buildings, their sensors blinded by the dust and thermal signatures from the fires. Bryant's team reached the perimeter fence and began cutting through it with plasma torches stolen from Krathian supply depots. An alarm sounded as they breached the fence, but they were already inside the perimeter. Krathian soldiers turned to engage them, but Lisa and her team opened fire from a new position, drawing the aliens' attention. It was a dance of death, each team moving in coordination, covering each other, creating chaos and confusion. Bryant reached the base of the relay and planted the explosive charges he had been carrying. They were crude devices, built from scavenged Krathian ordnance and human engineering, but they were powerful. He set the timer for 2 minutes and signaled his team to retreat. They didn't make it far before the Krathians realized what was happening. Plasma fire tore through the air, catching Frank in the chest. He went down hard, his body armor smoking. Danny grabbed him, dragging him toward cover as Bryant provided covering fire. The explosive charges detonated with a roar that shook the entire district. The relay's shields held for a moment, then collapsed as the energy overload cascaded through the structure. Secondary explosions rippled up the tower as power conduits ruptured, and the entire structure began to lean, its structural integrity compromised. Admiral Kreshtar watched in horror as his communication relay collapsed, taking with it the coordination network for the entire North American invasion. Across the continent, Krathian forces suddenly found themselves isolated, unable to receive orders or coordinate with other units. The occupation force was blind and deaf. But Bryant's team was paying the price for that victory. Frank was dead, killed by the plasma blast that had caught him during the retreat. 3 others were wounded, including Danny, who had taken shrapnel in his leg. They limped through the ruins, pursued by enraged Krathian soldiers who wanted revenge for the destroyed relay. Bryant covered their retreat, firing from different positions, always moving, never letting the aliens pin him down. He was exhausted, his body pushed beyond its limits, but he kept fighting because that's what he did. That's what the Honey Badger did. They made it back to the tunnels with the Krathians right behind them. Bryant collapsed the entrance with the last of his explosives, buying them time. Lisa treated the wounded in the darkness while they fled through the underground network, always moving, always one step ahead of death. When they finally reached safety, Bryant counted heads and realized they had lost 8 people. 8 brave souls who had given everything for a chance to hurt the invaders. He wanted to mourn them, wanted to honor their sacrifice, but there was no time. The battle wasn't over. News of the relay's destruction spread across the planet through underground networks. Human resistance forces, inspired by the victory, launched renewed attacks against Crethean positions. In orbit, the alien fleet found itself struggling to coordinate with ground forces, their communication dependent on relays that were now vulnerable to attack. Admiral Kreshtar made a decision that would define the rest of the invasion. He ordered a full retreat of ground forces to fortified positions and began a systematic orbital bombardment of areas with heavy resistance activity. If humans wanted to fight, he would turn their cities into graveyards. But the bombardment order triggered Marcus Webb's virus one final time. Every weapon system on every Crethean ship went offline simultaneously, leaving the fleet defenseless. And in that moment of vulnerability, Earth's remaining military forces struck back with everything they had. Nuclear missiles launched from hidden silos, satellites activated long-dormant weapons, and underground bases that everyone thought were destroyed came back online. The battle for Earth's orbit began in earnest, and for the first time since the invasion started, humanity had a fighting chance. It would be a long war, measured in years, not months, but there was hope now. Real, tangible hope. In the tunnels beneath New York, Bryant sat with his surviving team members, exhausted but alive. Katie had somehow found her way back to them, refusing to stay behind any longer. She sat beside him, her small hand in his, and for the first time in weeks, Bryant allowed himself to believe they might actually win. The honey badger had brought hell to the Cretheans, but more importantly, he had shown humanity that they could fight back. That one person, with courage and determination, could make a difference. That the darkest night eventually gave way to dawn. The war was far from over, but Earth would survive. Because humanity had learned the most important lesson of all. When you threaten their children, when you attack their home, humans don't surrender. They don't give up. They become something more dangerous than any alien invasion force could imagine. They become absolutely, terrifyingly unstoppable.